After the day of mourning comes the day of inquest. How did it come to be that a young man named Mitsuki Amano basically lost his life in a sumo match? As you might expect, a lot of people here in Japan are being very slow to answer that question, which I think tells you much about the wider issues. For we can't analyze this tragedy in some kind of sumo vacuum. We have to understand at least some of the values that sumo's coaches, the men we trust to keep our wrestlers safe, have imbibed throughout their lives, even before joining this sport. Look at the society around them. A giant monument to seniority. Power almost solely dependent on age. Disproportionate power held at the top. Investment in the status quo is huge. Nothing in the grand scheme of things is to challenge the notion that the oldest, most senior members of the group are always best placed to lead. That requires stifling some younger voices by overburdening them with deferential duties and buying them off with the vague promise that all their seniors' perks will one day come to them, so long as they simply get older. Sound familiar, sumo fans? It's a very familiar refrain for Japan's big media firms, where seniority reigns supreme. These firms, therefore, reinforce the perceived virtues of the status quo, and older is best. Because their staff really do believe it. It's how they value their own jobs. For most journalists, then, change and progress seem defined by how many public figures they can bring down without attacking the system behind them. Which is why Japan is most used to seeing individuals attacked. If something fails, someone selfish must have let the group down, because the group sure as hell can't be wrong. Sound familiar, sumo fans? Yes, these are of course generalizations. There are of course exceptions to these unwritten rules. But the code described here is broadly what this society is strongly conditioned to accept. Just as it is the maxim that effort is more important than result. Sound familiar, sumo fans? An effort that is all too often measured by how many hours people work, rather than the intensity or productivity within those hours, whose number, by the way, is greatly increased by the aspect of the seniority system which sees the customer always right, even if they are abusive. Now take these three aspects together, and you find a society rather ill-prepared to examine anomalies. Its first collective instinct is to pin anomalies on thoughtless youth, selfishness, or lack of effort, and dismiss any concern that they might be part of a bigger, undetected problem. On the rare occasions anomalies are properly discussed, it is generally by committees of older members, the proudest holders of the status quo prayer book. Those who view progress as a function of how many hours they discussed, and how much of the existing system they kept intact with their proposed cosmetic changes. It's why working practice reform meetings took up millions of labour hours in the 2010s, yet came up with very little to deal with the remote working challenges of 2020. And it's why last week's Sumo Reform Report read as it did. This is the society which has raised, or at least half-raised, every member of the Sumo Association. Not for better, not for worse, it just has. And is that backdrop which will really help us understand the more jarring aspects of Sumo's response to Hibikiryu. After Chairman Hakkaku's eulogy, the first comment on Hibikiryu's demise came from a ringside coach who actually watched it. It was hardly sound PR. "His head came down where the rope meets the clay," said the coach, which meant his head got stuck in the fall and his neck kind of snapped. But we have so many cases of falling from the head, and if he'd gone down in the middle of the ring, he might have just got up with a mere scratch. It's just a shocking run of bad luck, isn't it? We might be appalled, but are we surprised? In this coach's mind, the status quo works. His job is to defend it. And if he can't blame someone, he'll blame something. Bad luck. Because the alternative is too scary. A proper examination of this so-called anomaly would actually entail not only analysis of his ringside team's response, but of the esteemed premise that pro sumo must be fought on solid clay with a very hard rope by men unhealthily big. At present, that discussion can simply not be had. Another coach, after the passage of a day, at least offered a more reflective comment. I've always taught my boys to keep their arms in and fall from the head to decrease the chance of touching down first, he said. But now, I'm unable to say that. These coaches genuinely care for their charges, we know they do. And the capacity to reflect is there. But it seems only total disaster can trigger it. But this man's erstwhile conviction in the head-first fall, and its capacity to do no major harm, is as chilling as the fact that Hibikiryu likely fell as he did in faith. Coached to do so by a master whose word he could never seriously question. So badly did Hibikiryu land that even perfect assistance would have left him with a fight for his life. There was something so horribly wrong about that impact, even meters away. But maximizing his chances was the task at hand, and it was not done well. And yet, the tone from Sumo is unrepentant. Said a coach caught up in proceedings, "We quickly placed the call to the doctor, but the Sumo clinic is on a different floor, so it took him a while to come. I admit we probably should have rehearsed these situations more, but we did the best we could, and the doctor needing time to arrive is just a reality we face." Note how the man stresses his effort, the quality he deems Japan to prize so highly as to forgive him for the mess which followed. And note his refusal to question the status quo of 36 years. The clinic is on a different floor. It is what it is. Other coaches, we are pleased to learn, did raise the issue at a judges' meeting on March 31st, and mooted installing ringside doctors. However, others simply doubled down on existing policy, as how could their seniors have been so wrong for so long? The problem with that, said one, is we fight from 8:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. for 15 days. And if we have the doctors on for, say, 1-hour shifts, how many of them are we going to need? It's not like boxing where you just monitor a few fights and go home. Which is, I believe, nonsense, because an evening's boxing does indeed last for several hours, just like sumo. And you would only need 2 alternating doctors for a shift system, not several, wouldn't you? Yet still, his zeal for protecting what he has and what he knows leads him to go on. Of course, saving lives is important, he adds, but this kind of case happens once in several decades, if at all. And these doctors might be sitting there for an entire year and have nothing to do. So why don't we focus on getting our existing doctors here faster? Out comes the anomaly defense again, and, it seems, a pledge to hire a sprint coach with a stopwatch. But how unsettling this belief is that a doctor has no role to play unless someone collapses. At least a dozen bouts each day can provide visual cause to check for hidden trauma. This one of the colourful examples. I would rather Kaiho were checked after that than not. I would rather the sumo mantra be, Kaiho was lucky, than Hibikiryu was unlucky. Our men might need protecting, rather than there's surely nothing we can do. And even this complacency might have been part forgiven if another rumour had proven true. On the afternoon of Hibikiryu's death, it was announced that Sumo would run a workshop on dealing with dohyo emergencies. And although decades too late, at least that action could have passed for some kind of contrition. Yet incredibly, Press Chief Shibatayama, despite the obvious benefits of staying silent, refused to let us believe that this was the case. No, it's unconnected to Hibikiryu, and actually in response to Shonan no Umi, he said, without a second thought, referring to the concussion debacle of over 3 months ago. There too, the status quo was upheld and the need for doctor input shunned. Still, that matter is unresolved, wrongly dismissed as anomaly. Younger coaches, we understand, are pushing for change, but seniority dictates they will not have their way. The system must stay, their seniors vow. Look how hard we've worked, shouts Shibatayama. We've had defibrillator workshops, we've had fire drill workshops, we've trained to deal with fans who collapse even. And we've discussed at board level how to manage concussions. All true, and all irrelevant to the questions surrounding Hibikiryu, as well as oblivious to the fact that hard work, years of hard work, can be undone by a simple lapse, i.e., failing to spot the most immediate threat to the health and safety of people in your charge, due to overconfidence in a wrestler's capacity to withstand a fall. He's a rikishi, he's bound to be okay, is the default position which has just been proven false. Yet these wrong assertions remain unchallenged this week, with most papers content to print Sumo press releases verbatim, TV declining to report the incident, and Nikkan Sports only crying foul after it's far too late to change the outcome, when Sumo Masters will of course be least offended. And so the patterns continue. Threats to lives, if doubling as threats to the existing order, must be downplayed. Any changes watered down in endless discussion and hammered into existing structures till they blend into the original form. It's how most problems here are handled. It's how Sumo's handled Hibikiryu. And it's how, my goodness, a sumo wrestler has come to die.